Thank you very much, Robert, and good morning to all of you. Can I, Joy, start by saying thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I think the involvement and the attention that you received, it really just sped along, and I think everybody who's here, and if I can on your behalf, thank you very much. I know you've been working closely with Anya for some time, but really it was terrific. I have a script here, but I want to speak fairly quickly and briefly to you so that we can have time for a dialogue and for discussions. But if I can take the cue of what Robert had to say, and I'll leave the script with Anya. What's happening in the Department of Education is not a series of random interventions designed to provoke and prod the teachers and to cause annoyance with the wider community and to generally get up the nose of everybody because Ruairi Quinn really wants to meddle in somebody else's world. I know for some people it sounds like that, but it really is a very joined up programme. It's a programme that I haven't just initiated, it's a programme in part which I've inherited. I was very, very fortunate to have been asked by Eamon Gilmore about 5 years ago now, would I take on education as a responsibility in opposition. And it hadn't been my kind of area of activity for a long time, as I think Robert has alluded to. But I did come and do come from a family that had education at its core. We were a very disputatious family, as you've probably gathered. Every Sunday, when we had your dinner in the middle of the day, it took about 20 minutes to eat the meal and 2 hours to finish the discussion. And my father, who was a man of very strong opinions, with his 5 sons and daughter, and an uncle who came for a weekend and stayed for 10 years, and 2 extended families, and we were the only ones living in Dublin, so it would be an insult to the family not to come and visit and to partake. And there was always somebody coming, and there was always a discussion. And my father presided over this table, and his subtext was, let him finish. No, let him finish. Let him make his point, and then you can take him apart. So from that background and from that sense of learning and from that sense of discourse, I came to education with a passion, which I think might be apparent sometimes, and in impatience. I was told 2 days ago by one of my assistants that one of the senior officials said, we're not going to get X done until September. And I said, well, will you go back and tell him that I have 33 months left in this job? He probably has about 12 years. And when you start to put things in that context, they make sense. So in the area of education, we started with better liaison with the preschool section and with Francis Fitzgerald, because education starts in the home and then starts in preschool and all the way through. In opposition, we got a wake-up call in 2009 with the PISA results. And already, and I said that at the time in the Education Committee, but the department had already started to respond, and the literacy and numeracy focus is at the centre of an awful lot of the work that we're doing in the department, and in the way in which we've reconfigured both the requirements for literacy and numeracy, which actually are much more fundamental than many people realise. First of all, we found an awful lot of money by getting savings elsewhere to actually put into the literacy and numeracy strategy. It's much more structured, it's much more focused, and it's been measured and tested, because what isn't measured and tested doesn't necessarily get done. We've also transformed the training, education of teachers. It used to be a 2-year teacher training college for primary school teachers. It's now, starting from last September, a 4-year course, a 4-year degree in education. And our students who apply to become primary school teachers come from the top 15% of Leaving Certificate results. It's a statistic that most of my colleagues in the Council of Education Ministers in the European Union would simply die for. We are very fortunate in the quality of the people who apply to become primary school teachers, overwhelmingly female, but not exclusively, and there's a lot of mature students in their 20s who transfer to primary school education. But we have focused that extra year on better pedagogical skills. How do people learn? And how do you actually learn to teach rather than just pronounce? Very complicated, a lot of work, a lot of research been done, a lot of it here in Ireland, and we've reconfigured, in fact, We had 19 centres of education provision, 19 third-level centres of education provision. They are now being concentrated into 6 clusters, and a lot of that information is available for you. So in the primary school space, focus on preschool, looking at that. Francis Fitzgerald and myself will be talking about, in the first instance, improving the quality of childminders following the controversy that we've recently seen, and starting a debate, which I will repeat again because I got some slagging about it elsewhere. We give out child benefit. It's not called a child payment or a child maintenance, it's child benefit. Now, what is in the benefit of children? What's the greatest benefit? And it's a lot of money. And I think we should have a debate. In these very straitened times, yes, of course, it's an essential income support for the vast majority of families. That's an undoubted fact. But we should have a debate about how best to utilise that money. And we should have quality child care carers and also quality educated young people. That's in the primary sector. A lot of other things could be said as well. The junior cycle reform, where most of your children are going to go, and I was just talking to my elbow partner, who is a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, I think you said to me. By the time they get into junior cycle, it's going to be very different to what's currently happening now. First of all, we've had a few attempts to reform the curriculum at junior cycle. Really very good attempts, going back, I think, Harold, about 20 years. But they never got off the runway because the method of assessment, if you change the curriculum, you change the method or the methods of assessment, and if you change the methods of assessment with the state exam, one thing clicks in: money. Money, the cost of it. 60 million it costs for Leaving Cert and Junior Cert at the present time. That's a lot of money. So the NCCA gave us a wonderful curriculum. It really had all the things that you'd want in a curriculum. But we didn't really know how to implement it in terms of the testing system that we had. And then 2 senior colleagues, they're not staff, most certainly, Robert, 2 senior colleagues said, we've got an idea that might get around this. It might work, but it's a bit strange. I said, well, try me. He said, why don't you just abolish the exam? We don't want children to leave school at 16 or 15. Therefore, we don't need a state certificate. In 1967, they abolished the primary certificate exam. The world didn't collapse. In fact, in my view, it liberated the primary school classroom. The idea now that you'd actually force a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old to do an exam, and what that would do to the way in which kids learn, horrifies me, quite frankly. And then when I explored what the thinking was behind it, well, if we don't have a state exam, we can assess it in a particular way. And all we'll be asking teachers to do is to actually do in 3rd year what they do in 2nd year and what they do in 5th year. And there was a sort of a silence. And I went home and sort of pondered over the weekend and talked casually with a number of people. And I came back fairly quickly and said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. And that's what we're going to do. Now, that created a lot of problems for a lot of teachers, but no, people don't like change. And people who teach subjects, as a history teacher will tell you, in primary school, your teachers teach children, but secondary school teachers teach subjects. And, you know, what will happen? And already you're getting the narrative. This country is obsessed with history, obsessed with it. Yet history teachers think that nobody's going to study history. We're obsessed with history. It goes back much further than 800 years, I can tell you. So what I've said to them, look, I'm a politician. I make decisions. That's my mandate. I have decided the destination. No, I'm not going to consult with anybody. I've taken advice. Judges don't consult. Politicians take advice, take inputs, and then make a decision. I said, that's not for a negotiation. The destination is clear. But the way we get there, and the speed at which we travel, and how we adjust, and how we learn from the implementation mistakes, which inevitably we will make. I think it's fair to say, and it's no great secret, that if we were to start the Project Maths project again, and I say we in the very collective sense, we would do a lot of things differently. And that's honest and open. You know, we make mistakes. That's how we learn. So what I've said, and I continue to say, that the youngsters starting 2nd level school next September, 12 months, will take one subject through the new system and will sit their in-house exam in June of 2017. And it will take 3 more years before that whole cohort in 2020 come through with a different kind of system. And at the end of it all, We will want outcomes that enable people to actually become lifelong learners. And the curriculum, and I know it's not part of the primary side, but your children won't stay forever in primary school. Look at the curriculum, look at the changes, and look at the outcomes. This is what we want young people to be. So, enough of that. The other thing about this country is it has changed and will continue to change, both internally and because of the welcome arrival of so many talented people who've chosen to come and live in Ireland. Thank you for coming, and I hope you stay, and I hope your children happily grow up here. But the diversity of the Irish landscape now, both from within and from without, is very different to what it was when the primary school system was established. It's 182 years old, one of the oldest primary school systems in the world, older than our sister country across the water in Great Britain, certainly in England. And it was done at a time when there were only one kind. It's a public-private partnership. We, the state, with your money, taxpayers' money, provide the curriculum, pay the teachers, organise the inspection and the examination and all that kind of process with it, and the private side are the patrons. And in 1831, the only patron kind of capable groups were the churches, the denominational Christian churches, which is why after partition in this state, 92% of all of our primary schools are under the patronage of the Catholic Church. That's wonderful for an awful lot of people who are very happy with that, don't necessarily want it to change, but not everybody is. And Archbishop Jim Martin, about 4 or 5 years ago now, said that he had too many schools for his diocesan community in the Greater Diocese of Dublin, about 500 schools out of 3,200 in round figures. And he wanted assistance, a forum, in which he could, in an orderly way, because you don't want to disrupt the day job of the children, divest the patronage. I've responded to that and we're proceeding with it to provide it. But I've always said, and I will continue to say, this will be a slow process, but we have to start the journey somewhere. But no child's daily learning experience should be disrupted by the arguments of parents who've long since left the schooling area, or ideologues, or people with opinions who are no longer dependent on getting a good education. And we can do both together. The issue of bullying in our schools is something that we've addressed. The guidelines for bullying hadn't been looked at for 20 years in our society, in our schools. Not because this department wasn't interested, of course it was, but it just hadn't come up. But in the last 20 years, enormous things have changed. Enormous things. And bullying is one of the cruelest things that can happen. And you know, there's different kinds of bullying. It's not the physical ones that you associate. There has been the bullying of the bright child, which I particularly, the sort of kid who puts up their hand because they know the answer, or they're so keen. I have a neighbour's child in particular that comes to mind, and you all do yourself. They've actually retreated. He lost at least 2 years of his life from just being enthusiastically engaged in subject matter. Retreated into himself, wasn't able to, as a teenager, to really come of age in the way he should. He's only now, after at least 2 years lost, he's only now finding himself having changed from one course to another. And that kind of bullying happens as well, and we have to be open to it. And of course, homophobic bullying, which you couldn't even 20 years ago talk about, let alone recognise, is now something that has been mainstreamed, and we have recognised it in so many different ways, including civil partnership, and we have to address that. So the whole question of bullying, we got a great input from all the educational partners, all of the educational partners. And the action plan really is something of great importance, and I think we have to realise that it is part and parcel. If a child is fearful of going to school, if they are not comfortable for whatever reason, they're not going to learn. They just can't learn. So we have to address that. So from preschool, from literacy and numeracy, from patronage, from the really good curriculum that is in primary school into the junior cycle, into the leaving cert, and let me tell you briefly about what that change is, and into third level. The leaving cert has been captured by the third level institutions. Universities are a bit like soccer teams or Gaelic teams. They want great players. And they will ensnare pupils to reveal how good they are by, in fact, changing the point system. I didn't realise until I became minister that, in fact, the point system is organised not by the Department of Education, but it's actually organised by the 7 universities, by a private company controlled by the registrars of those 7 universities, and they have invited all of the, I think, 39 third-level providers, 1 or 2 of which are private, to participate in the points system. I know you're representing primary school pupils, but many of you possibly have children who've gone through that process. If you're interested, www.transitions.ie is a conference website that was held in September in 2011, which outlined what had happened. And there's a wonderful paper by former Professor of Education, Dr. Anya Hyland, whose name might be known to many of you, who wrote about how, in fact, these institutions had increased the number of options by 300%. So, in fact, you know, a young person, 17, 18, sitting sometime in January or February of this year, was looking at this myriad menu of possible courses. They were all designed basically to identify students and to get students with high points. What has happened is 3 problems have arisen that have been identified that we're dealing with, and they're the following. There was the unacceptable, problematic predictability of exams, where the course was deemed to be fairly good, but in fact it was open to gaming. Predictability, teachers would just teach to a particular test, or teach with the probability that this poet would come up with that poet. So we're addressing that, we're addressing the way in which it's marked, and we're trying to reduce the number of courses. So I'm going to finish at this point and prepare to take the questions. But what we're trying to do in education is really to reform it from the beginning, preschool through primary, in the literacy and numeracy, which will extend into the age of 14, right through the whole of the 2nd level curriculum, and into a point where our 3rd level colleges will in fact themselves work much better. But that will be for another day in terms of it. But I want to tell you, both within the department and within the Oireachtas, we can, 5 parties in the Oireachtas, find many things upon which we can fight and argue about. But fortunately, and I would like to think that I've helped to create the climate of consensus, education is not a political football, as it has become in so many European countries. If one party says we're doing this, the other party automatically says, no, we're going to change it. In both the debate on the junior cycle reforms that I've spoken about, we had a vote in the Dáil. There was no party voted against it. And the same in the Seanad. And that means that after 33 months, when I'm no longer there, there will be a legacy of consent and consensus that will ensure that the programme will, I hope, continue. And I have worked with my opposition colleagues, so much so that the legislation to merge the 33 VEC bodies, vocational education committees, into 16 new entities, engaging in an enormous amount of change, went through both the Dáil and the Seanad without a single vote. Without a single vote, because I consulted with colleagues and I said, this is what we're trying to do, what input do you want to have? And we've got it through. So consensus politically, and we're not good at it, and a lot of things in this country, but in education, which is so important, consensus is an essential component of moving forward. And consensus, as I, as Minister, have realised, is listening to other people's opinions and sometimes recognising that their opinions are better informed than yours and running with the best opinion. Thank you very much indeed.